Popeye was released in the arcade in 1980. What the hell? This is Donkey Kong. So that was my lame-ass segue into the brief tidbit that Popeye evolved into Donkey Kong. In 1981, when Donkey Kong was to be developed, Nintendo tried to acquire the license for Popeye to use for a video game, but it didn't work out. So instead, the characters Donkey Kong, Pauline, and Mario, who at the time was called Jumpman, were based off of Bluto, Olive Oil, and Popeye respectively. Fast forward a year later, and Nintendo was successful in getting the Popeye license, thanks mainly to the success of Donkey Kong putting Nintendo on the map. This resulted in the Popeye arcade game, which also did well. Not nearly as iconic as Donkey Kong, of course, but it held its own. It was ported to many consoles, and I did review the Atari 2600 version, but the NES port came much closer to mirroring the arcade version. This port was also notable in being one of the three launch titles when the NES, aka Famicom, was released in Japan, the other two being Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. So all three launch titles had some kind of tie-in to Popeye. The NES port is a very faithful translation of its arcade counterpart. Even more impressive is the fact that this is literally in the infancy of the console's existence. Like the arcade version, the objective is to catch objects dropped by Olive Oil while avoiding Bluto, or Brutus as he's referred to in this version. I never call him that personally. The objects you need to collect depend on the stage. Hearts in stage 1, music notes in stage 2, and letters spelling out help in stage 3. Once you collect the necessary amount, you've cleared the stage. If any of these objects hits the water below, it starts sinking and you have to play lifeguard and save it from drowning. I know, it's weird as hell, but it's early 80s video games. Bluto throws beer bottles, punches you from underneath, and pounces on you from above. One hit kills you. But you can fuck him up by eating spinach, rendering you temporarily invincible, and you can knock his ass out. You also can trap him in a bucket for a short period with this trap in stage 1. Other hazards include buzzards in stage 3, which you can punch out even without the spinach, and the Sea Hag, who only appears in the Game B difficulty setting, or if you complete all 3 stages in Game A, and then the game resets with the Sea Hag in place. The only real noticeable difference between the arcade version and this port is that the Sea Hag doesn't chuck bottles from the sides of the screen, instead opting to drop skulls from overhead. It's different, but doesn't take anything away from the experience. The other omission from the arcade is Wimpy, who helped spring you up on the seesaw for bonus points. He's been replaced with absolutely nothing. The physics of being sprung into the sky by a seesaw with no counterweight is more bizarre than Popeye's bicep to forearm size ratio. Overall, this version of Popeye is quite enjoyable. It looks and plays a lot like the arcade game that it's based on. There's not a lot of content to it, but it's still a fun, quick little platformer. And that wraps up this edition of Aqualung's Game Reviews. See you next time.